Led by Governor Ron Desantis, a Republican with presidential ambitions, the Florida Legislature passed a sweeping package of immigration measures that would represent the toughest crackdown on undocumented immigration by any state in more than a decade. The bill comes as DeSantis gears up for an anticipated presidential run in the United States that would likely pit him against former president and current Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. Here's what DeSantis told the media while unveiling anti-immigrant measures.
All right, here we go, guys. Pretty important legislation into law here momentarily. I am joined here today by the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, Sheriff Al Nienhuis from Hernando County. Of course, we have the CEO of Miller Electric who's hosting us, Henry Brown. I want to thank him for doing that. We have Senator Clay Yarborough with us here today. And we have Representatives Michael, Black, and Jacques. So thank you all for being, and thanks for your great work on all of this. And then we're also going to be joined by Nikki Jones and her daughters Harley and Raven, who you will hear from a little bit later. So thank you for coming, Nikki. I don't think anybody could have any other view but that we've got massive problems at our southern border with Mexico. And this is something that is the responsibility of Joe Biden. This is a responsibility that he has defaulted on really from day one of his presidency. And he is charged with ensuring the safety and security of this country. He's charged with ensuring that the laws are faithfully executed, and he has refused to meet that obligation. And in Florida, we recognize this from day one, and we've acted really since he took office to combat the negative effects of his border policy. Worse this week with the expiration of Title 42. You're going to end up having 10,000, 15,000 a day potentially. Last fiscal year, they had almost 2.4 million encounters with illegal aliens. That's the highest ever in our history, even beating Biden's previous record of 1.96 million. And that's just the encounters. There's other people coming in who don't get encountered, and so the numbers are a lot higher than that. But if you look at that almost 2.4 million, that's more than the combined populations of the cities of Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando, and Tampa. The Biden administration recently claimed that when it comes to illegal immigration, quote, "You've seen it come down by more than 90%. That is a lie. That is something that they're trying to feed you and hope their buddies in corporate media will run with, but and demonstrably untrue. So you have huge, huge problems with Title 42 expiring. This is Biden's estimates, are they think it could be up to 13,000 illegal aliens crossing the border every single day. And at that pace, on an annual basis, that would be 4.5 million, and that's roughly the size of Miami-Dade and Broward counties combined, Florida's two most populous counties. And so Title 42 is ending. They had tried to get rid of it earlier. It's tied to COVID. So they actually wanted COVID restrictions for you, but they wanted to remove Title 42 for illegal aliens. And so we in Florida, with the Attorney General Ashley Moody, we sued the Biden administration to keep Title 42 in place, and we were able to win that case, and actually would have been a lot worse over the last year or so had we not done that. Now that the COVID emergency is ending, quote unquote, Title 42 is going to expire, and so you are going to see a massive surge of illegal aliens. You have a duty to ensure that these borders are secure. This is a huge disaster on our hands, and it does not comport with the duties of his office to just allow this to happen. Alexander Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers that energy in the executive is the leading characteristic of good government. where is this president's energy? Where's his vigor? Where's his commitment to the cause? He's just sitting around doing nothing of importance or nothing of note while the American people suffer. And what is the problem with this? Well, first of all, it's just chaos. We're supposed to be the world's leading superpower, and yet we can't even maintain control of our own southern border. The Mexican drug cartels have more to say about what goes on the southern border than our own U.S. government does. And so you have a situation where there is just no rule of law. It's been totally tossed out the window, and that is not what we want in a constitutional republic. You also have the fact that the sheer number of people coming, these border towns, they get overwhelmed with the number of people, but then when they settle them in the interior of our country, you have all kinds of burdens placed on taxpayers, on medical, on education, on criminal justice. All of these different things impact communities in a very, very big way. And you want to know how it's a burden? All you have to do is look back when we helped send 50 illegal aliens to Martha's Vineyard, one of the most wealthy enclaves in this country. They removed them off that island the next day because they said they couldn't accommodate 50. Well, look at some of these other places. They're getting thousands of people coming illegally, and yet they're just supposed to grin and bear it. Of course, you do have criminal aliens that are coming across the border, and people say, Florida, you're not on the border. What do you care? Well, October 21, you had an illegal alien stab a man to death right here in Jacksonville. March of last year, illegal alien murdered a couple who were participating in Bike Week in Daytona. And in September, we had an illegal alien drive a front loader at a construction site that killed a sheriff's deputy in Tampa Bay. And so you've seen this happen just in Florida. You're seeing it happen all over the country. You also have massive amounts of fentanyl that are pouring into our country. Tens of thousands of deaths because of fentanyl every single year. And it's all coming across the border. It's all being run by the drug cartels. And this border situation is saying you're going to be able to move as much fentanyl across the border as you need to. We had just last year over 100,000 overdose deaths, and I think you're likely to see that continue with the amount of product that's being moved in. So this is a huge, huge dereliction of duty to ignore the security and the borders of your own country. But as I mentioned, we saw this from the very beginning of the Biden administration, and we've worked very hard to do, look, states are limited in terms of what they do. I think a good reform federally would be deputize states to enforce immigration law. Texas should be able to send them back to Mexico or back to these other countries. You shouldn't have to turn them over to Border Patrol and then Biden orders them released back into our own country. Of course more people are going to come if that's the case. So I wish states would be deputized to do more, but as it is, we're doing the limit of what states can do. We have sent, in 2021, when this thing was really taken off, we sent Florida law enforcement to Texas, to the border, to help with interdictions. And those guys did a good job. I think the problem is people come, they get interdicted, then you turn them over to Border Patrol, and Border Patrol just releases them into our country anyways. And so you're thinking to yourself, why is that a great use of our resources? If it'd be one thing if you were repelling it from happening, then I think that'd be great. I'd be happy to do it. So that was something that some of them were able to be charged with crimes, which was great, but many of them were not because they basically came illegally. They didn't necessarily have drugs on them, so they get released into our country, and that's not good policy. We also issued an executive order that prohibited agencies in the state of Florida from providing any support for the resettlement of illegals in Florida, and that prohibited licensing facilities that house illegal alien minors. And this is a cottage industry. These organizations make a lot of money off this. You want your borders enforced, but a lot of them don't because they make more money having the open border. We also signed legislation that prohibited government contracts with any private entity that is assisting the Biden administration in resettling illegal aliens into the state of Florida. And then we signed legislation requiring all public employers, contractors, subcontractors attempting to enter contracts with government employers to do mandatory e-verify, to verify that the workers are legally employed. We also sued the Biden administration for his catch and release policy, and we won in federal court in the Panhandle, and we were glad that that happened. We also last year signed legislation cracking down on opioid dealers and traffickers, subjecting people who distribute certain controlled substances that lead to somebody's death to a potential conviction for first-degree felony murder, and increasing the mandatory minimum sentence for trafficking fentanyl to up to 20 years. And at the end of the day, when you're dealing with fentanyl, there's a whole host of ways you have to approach it. We believe in working on the demand side. The First Lady has put in a lot of programs in schools to try to let students know, hey, messing around with drugs in this day and age, you may think it's something, but if they put fentanyl in that, you could die. And that's just the reality of what we're seeing. And so you've got to fight it from the demand side. You've got to let people know that doing fentanyl is almost like playing Russian roulette with your life. It's not worth doing. You also have to work on the treatment side. We have a coordinated opioid recovery network we call the CORD network. And what that does, if somebody overdoses and then they go to the hospital and then they're revived, to just put them back on the street, if they're addicted, they are likely to have relapse. And so with CORE, you have interventions, you get them on appropriate medication, or you get them appropriate medical attention, and the goal is to get them to live productive lives alongside this addiction. And of the people that went into the program, the relapse rate has been like 5%. So that's something that's really, really good. So you got to do all these things, but you do have to fight the supply. And you have to make it so that if you're bringing this stuff in, we're going to hold you accountable. Last week I signed a bill that is enhanced penalties for fentanyl dealers who market it to minors by putting it in candy and things of that nature. We're throwing the book at them if they're going after our children, but it's very important that we understand that that is something that makes a big, big difference. We also formed a strike force of state and local law enforcement to interdict human smuggling and human trafficking and to seize illegal drugs and weapons being transported into the state. So a lot of this is in the Panhandle because people are coming on I-10, but it's really happened all over the state in various ways. The strike force has resulted in nearly 300 felony charges, more than 40 human smuggling charges, and nearly 130 drug charges. And part of that is people do that. You need to hold them accountable. But it also sends a signal to other people. They're thinking about coming from the border, smuggling people somewhere. Florida is not a good place for you to do that, okay, because you're going to end up facing pushback. If you want to go somewhere where they are a sanctuary state, then do California or do Illinois or something, but don't do here because we're going to fight back. We also petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to impanel a statewide grand jury to examine international human smuggling networks that bring illegal aliens to the southern border and ultimately into the United States, including into Florida. And it has released some of its initial findings. So these grand juries, they can issue reports as they go. And if you read the report that they most recently did, I mean, these minors are basically victims of trafficking. Many of them have been sexually abused. Some of them are mistreated in other ways. And this is all happening with the imprimatur of your federal government. And I think it's a disgrace. We also secured another $12 million. Well, we initially secured $12 million for the illegal alien transport program. So we did that, for example, with Martha's Vineyard. We also got more money in this year's budget to be able to help with that problem. It's not just U.S.-Mexico border, though. If you look, you have boats trying to come into Florida from places like Haiti. And so we started to see a spike in this. And the Coast Guard does a good job, but they don't have enough assets. Biden will not send more assets. So you start to see boats getting through. And then at one point, the feds dumped like 350 illegal aliens in the Florida Keys. So we said that that's unacceptable. So we declared a state of emergency, and then we surged Florida state maritime resources to work alongside the Coast Guard, fill in the gaps. And what we've been able to do is, since August, we've had more than 12,000 illegal migrants attempting to come to Florida shores. They've been interdicted and repatriated to Haiti or Cuba or wherever they were coming from. We've also removed 393 vessels from Florida shores and waterways that have been used by illegal migrants to enter the state. And then back in February, and so that is a huge success right there, because, I mean, like, just imagine if we had left it to the feds and they don't have enough resources, you'd probably have hundreds more boats that would end up getting to Florida shores. So we're proud of really leaning in on all these issues. We think it's very important. Obviously, if we had a different administration, be a lot easier, because, you know, you'd be able to actually deal with the problem at its source. As it is, we've got to use the tools we have. So in February, we were in Jacksonville, and we proposed strong legislation to curb illegal immigration, both deterring illegal immigrants from coming to Florida, but also holding people accountable within Florida who were involved in illegal immigration. And so we made that promise. We said that we were going to go big. And today we deliver on that promise by signing Senate Bill 1718. And even the New York Times admitted this is the strongest legislation against illegal immigration anywhere in the country. What the bill does is a number of different things. This makes Florida the largest state in the country to do full E-Verify for employment. And that's important because if people are going to come if they get benefits, and so what you want to do is say there's not benefits for coming illegally. You're either here as a native or you come legally, and those are two fine things, but to come across the border and end up getting benefits in Florida, you know, does not make sense. So we already have, it's already against the law for someone to be employed if they're here illegally, but the E-Verify provides a way to make sure that that's enforceable. So we think that that's something that's going to make a big difference. Senate Bill 1718 also enhances human smuggling penalties in Florida and subjects offenders to prosecution under the Florida RICO Act, which was a recommendation from the statewide grand jury that we had. And so if you're knowingly transporting illegal aliens into Florida, you can face up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine per offense. If you're caught transporting 5 or more illegal aliens, or an unaccompanied illegal alien minor, or you have a prior conviction for human smuggling, you can get a $10,000 fine and up to 15 years in prison. Now, at the end of the day, you wouldn't have the illegal immigration problem if you didn't have a lot of people that were facilitating this in our country. And so in Florida, that's not a good bet for you to do that here, and this bill shows that that's the case. The bill also prohibits county governments and NGOs from using tax dollars to provide IDs for illegal aliens. It invalidates out-of-state licenses issued to illegal aliens, and it makes it a felony for illegal aliens to use a fake ID to gain employment. We don't have in Florida, and we shouldn't have, driver's licenses for illegal aliens. A lot of people across the country who want open borders, they want driver's licenses, and you have it I think in California and a number of these other states. We've never done that, but what happens is you have some of these local governments, they're actually working with private groups to generate ID cards to be able to be used as if that makes you legal to be here. So we're not going to recognize that. We're also not going to recognize a driver's license from California that was issued to somebody here illegally, or these other states. And so we're making sure that in Florida we're doing it legal and we're doing it right. The bill, and part of, I think, that the issue, you know, with the, because you're going to hear from an Angel wife, you're going to hear from Rep. Michael, Angel Mom, and that's really important. When you have somebody here illegally committing criminal offenses against our own people, those crimes would not have been committed if they just weren't brought in illegally. And so that's a huge thing, and it's something that we spend a lot of time on, and that's important. It's also the case that even somebody not committing crimes, it's imposing huge costs on our community. And one of the ways it imposes huge costs is medical costs, because you show up to an emergency room, they treat you. Doesn't matter if you're legal or illegal. Of course, if most of the people here illegally, or probably all of them, they're not paying for any of the services they're getting. You're paying for it as taxpayers. And so we started in 2021 collecting with our state agencies data on healthcare costs for illegal aliens, and we found that this is a lot of money. During the 2021-22 fiscal year, healthcare costs for illegal aliens in Florida was nearly $340 million, and taxpayers were on the hook for 2/3 of that cost. So the Biden administration is trying to increase those costs. They want to actually use Medicaid to cover illegal aliens, which we don't support and won't do in Florida, but that's their vision in terms of what they want to do. But what the bill does is it says you have to collect data at the hospital level about care that's being given to people here illegally, because we were able to identify some. We think that there's a lot more, and the public deserves an honest accounting of how much this is costing us in terms of services, and health care is probably number one. And then, as I mentioned, we also secured an additional $12 million for the illegal alien transport program to sanctuary jurisdictions. A lot of these sanctuary jurisdictions, they say they want open borders. They say that nobody's illegal. They get mad when people want to enforce the border, and yet when these people, the illegal aliens, are brought to their jurisdictions, they scream bloody murder. You saw it in Martha's Vineyard. You see it in New York City. You see it in these other places. And the reality is, it's shining a light on how absurd the federal government's policies are. We have to stop this nonsense. This is not good for our country. And when even sanctuary jurisdictions are saying they can't bear the burden of it, you know this is no way to run a government. This is no way to have a country based on the rule of law. This is no way to keep your people safe. So today, we are acting with the strongest measures yet. We're proud of the legislature for stepping up and for getting this done, but we're bracing for some turbulent times ahead. And I think when you have a president who's turned a blind eye to what's gone on the border, I don't think he's even visited the border the whole time he's been in office. When you have that, you're likely to see it get a lot worse. So we're protecting Floridians with the full extent of our powers to do that. But it's sad. It's sad to see what's happened. It's sad to see these images of the lawlessness. It's sad to hear the stories of the people that have been victimized by people coming across the border. It's sad to see the mothers who've lost children as a result of fentanyl overdose. This has taken a big toll on our country, and Florida's fighting back. If you're on trial for a crime, it has to be a unanimous verdict. That's how it should be. That's how it always is. So say you're on trial for first-degree murder, you're convicted. Then it's a death penalty case. Then the jury would vote on whether to give the death sentence or not. And historically, in Florida, if 8 of the 12 jurors said death, you could get capital. Our old liberal Supreme Court said that that was somehow unconstitutional, and so the legislature changed it to say, okay, you have to do unanimous for the penalty. And the current Supreme Court reversed that. And so we were in a situation where the legislature hadn't changed it back. You had the Parkland situation where this guy massacres these students and teachers. The only appropriate punishment, in my judgment, would be capital. Now, it's fine if you don't agree with capital punishment. A lot of good people don't, but it is the law in Florida, and so my view, the worst of the worst, you have to give that. Part of it's to deter other people. Part of it is just that's the only appropriate punishment, and I think the victims deserve maximum justice. But what happened was they fell a juror or two short on that. And the question is, were these jurors that were really not inclined to give it under any circumstance? And if you have a unanimous, you have one juror that can basically nullify what the rest do. No question about the guilt. Yeah, the unanimous, you got to be unanimous for guilt. So these are guilty people. But then the question is, going forward, if you have 8 of the 12 that agree with that, that really should be enough to move forward, given that some people could get on the jury who really aren't intent on ever doing capital. So we did the law. Part of it, the Parkland families were really supportive of it. Now the question is there may have been, I signed the law a couple weeks ago, there may be cases where the crime had already been committed, the individual had already been charged, but they haven't gone through the trial yet. So now when you go through the trial, is that 8-4 threshold going to apply? And basically it's just a question of law. I think it does because it's a procedural change, and usually procedural changes are fine. But they'll file motions, it'll be litigated, and then you'll go from there. So my anticipation was, yes, it would likely apply to pending cases just because procedural rules do. You can't change a substantive rule in the midst. So say you committed conduct which clearly isn't criminal. If the legislature then criminalized it after you committed it, they can't go back and say you committed a crime because you didn't at the time. And so that's a difference between substance and procedure. So I think it's going to work out and it'll be fine.